Attorney General Bondi, does a convicted sex offender like Ghislaine Maxwell deserve special treatment and privileges in prison? Yes or no?
Let me be crystal clear on this. No. And
Thank you.
let me keep going. No, let me keep going.
Perfect. Well, I
did not know she was being transferred.
I asked you yes or no.
She was not transferred to a lower.
Shocking moment in Congress. 9 hours in a private room at a federal courthouse in Tallahassee, Florida on July 24th and 25th. 9 hours with Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche sitting across a table from Ghislaine Maxwell, the woman who trafficked children for Jeffrey Epstein, the woman serving 20 years for recruiting minors to be sexually abused, the woman whose victims were sitting in a congressional hearing room 6 months later demanding answers about what happened in that room. 9 hours, and 7 days after those 9 hours ended, Ghislaine Maxwell was transferred to a luxury prison camp in Texas that sex offenders are legally prohibited from entering. 7 days. That is the timeline that nobody in the Department of Justice wants to explain. That is the timeline that makes survivors of Epstein's trafficking ring use words like cover-up and betrayal and preferential treatment. That is the timeline that Attorney General Pam Bondi claimed to know nothing about when she testified before Congress. But someone knew. Someone signed the transfer order. Someone waived the policy that says convicted sex offenders must be housed in at least low-security facilities and can never, under any circumstances, be placed in minimum security prison camps. Someone made the call. And the meeting, those 9 hours with Todd Blanche, Trump's former personal defense attorney, who is now the #2 official at the Department of Justice, happened exactly 1 week before Maxwell was moved to what inmates call Club Fed. If you think that is a coincidence, you have not been paying attention. Watch this video to the end, because what members of Congress discovered about that prison transfer, about the special privileges Maxwell received, about the inmates who were threatened with punishment for even mentioning her name, exposes something that goes far beyond one convicted sex trafficker getting comfortable accommodations. It exposes a systematic effort to protect Maxwell, to keep her quiet, to make sure whatever she knows about Epstein's network stays buried. And the architect of that effort, the man who spent 9 hours with her right before she was rewarded with a transfer that violated every Bureau of Prisons policy, was Trump's guy, Todd Blanche. If you are following this story, if you want to understand what is really happening with the Epstein files and why the cover-up keeps getting worse, subscribe right now and turn on notifications, because the details that keep emerging about Maxwell's prison transfer are not just scandalous. They are evidence of obstruction, they are proof that the fix is in, and they explain why survivors of Epstein's abuse are saying that justice has been denied. July 24th, Tallahassee, Florida. The timing of the meeting itself was suspicious. Just weeks earlier, the Department of Justice had faced massive public criticism for refusing to release the full Epstein files as Congress had ordered. The Wall Street Journal had just published a report about Epstein's birthday book, the book that contained what appeared to be a personal note from Donald Trump with a drawing of a naked woman and a signature that forensic experts said matched Trump's handwriting from the 1990s. Trump had called it a forgery. He had filed a $10 billion defamation lawsuit against the journal. The political pressure was building. The cover-up was starting to crack. And that is when Todd Blanche, the Deputy Attorney General, the man who had defended Trump in the Mar-a-Lago classified documents case, the man who owed his position entirely to Trump's patronage, showed up in Tallahassee to meet with the one person who could confirm or deny Trump's connections to Epstein's trafficking operation. The meeting was highly unusual. That is the phrase former federal prosecutors used when they heard about it. Highly unusual, because deputy attorneys general do not interview convicted felons. That is not how the system works. When the DOJ wants to talk to someone in prison, they send an FBI agent. They send a prosecutor from the local U.S. Attorney's office. They do not send the #2 official in the entire Department of Justice to spend 2 days in a private room with a high-profile inmate, unless there is something else going on, unless the meeting is not really about gathering information, unless it is about making a deal. Blanche met with Maxwell for 9 hours over those 2 days. Her lawyer, David Oscar Marcus, was present. No recording was made. No transcript was produced. The DOJ has refused to say what was discussed. Blanche has made no public statements about what Maxwell told him. Maxwell's lawyer confirmed the meeting happened but declined all further comment. And 1 week later, Maxwell was transferred from FCI Tallahassee, a low-security federal correctional institution with double-fenced perimeters and armed guards, to federal prison Camp Bryan in Texas, a minimum security facility with no perimeter fencing where inmates live in dormitory-style housing and have access to recreation programs, work assignments, and freedoms that simply do not exist in higher security prisons. The transfer violated Bureau of Prisons Policy, BOP Program Statement 5100.08 is clear. Inmates convicted of sex offenses must be assigned a sex offender public safety factor that automatically excludes them from minimum security placement. Sex offenders must be in at least low security facilities. They are categorically ineligible for prison camps. No discretion, no gray area, unless someone waives the policy. And that is exactly what happened. Only the administrator of the BOP's Designation and Sentence Computation Center can grant a PSF waiver. That waiver authority has not been exercised for a sex offender since 2012, not once in 13 years, until Ghislaine Maxwell, 7 days after meeting with Todd Blanche, 7 days after spending 9 hours with the Deputy Attorney General who used to be Trump's defense lawyer, 7 days after whatever conversation happened in that private room, Maxwell received a waiver that had never been granted to anyone like her before, and she was transferred to a prison camp that is literally known as Club Fed, a facility so comfortable that former Bureau of Prisons officials have described it as resembling a college campus more than a correctional institution. Federal Prison Camp Bryan houses approximately 635 female inmates. It is minimum security, which means the women there are considered low-risk, non-violent offenders. Most are serving time for white-collar crimes, financial fraud, tax evasion, the kind of crimes that do not involve physical violence or threats to public safety. The facility operates on a campus model, dormitory housing instead of cells, open movement instead of controlled corridors, recreation programs, work assignments that allow inmates to move freely around the compound. It is the lowest security level in the federal prison system, and it is exactly where Maxwell should never have been placed. Elizabeth Holmes and Jen Shaw are housed there, non-violent offenders, white-collar criminals, people who fit the profile for minimum security. Maxwell does not, but there she is anyway. Reports began emerging within weeks of Maxwell's transfer about the special privileges she was receiving at FPC Bryan. Multiple sources, including inmates who spoke to media outlets under condition of anonymity, described a pattern of preferential treatment that went far beyond normal prison operations. Catered meals delivered to her dormitory, private workout time in the facility's gym when other inmates were not permitted access, extended phone privileges and secretarial services for managing her correspondence, and perhaps most remarkably, access to what has been described as therapy puppy time, sessions where Maxwell was allowed to spend time with therapy dogs as part of what prison officials allegedly characterized as mental health support. When these reports reached Congress, members demanded answers. Representative Pramila Jayapal asked Attorney General Pam Bondi about them directly during a House Judiciary Committee hearing in February 2026. The exchange was revealing not because of what Bondi said but because of what she tried to avoid saying. Jayapal laid out the timeline. Maxwell's interview with Blanche, the transfer days later, the special privileges, then the key question, does a convicted sex offender like Ghislaine Maxwell deserve special treatment in prison? Yes or no? Bondi's answer, let me be crystal clear, no. Then she tried to keep talking. Jayapal cut her off. Perfect. When we agree we can move on. But Bondi had a bomb to drop. I did not know she was transferred. The Attorney General claimed she did not know one of the most high-profile inmates had been transferred in violation of BOP policy. Either Bondi was lying or admitting catastrophic negligence. Jayapal pressed. Who ordered the transfer? Who signed off on special privileges? Was it Todd Blanche? Bondi evaded. She claimed it was a same-level facility. False. Low security and minimum security are different classifications. The Attorney General claiming ignorance was either a lie or admission of negligence. Then Bondi pivoted, started talking about a murder on a New York subway, accused Jayapal of not caring about crime victims, deflected, attacked, everything except answer who moved Maxwell to Club Fed. But Congress was not letting this go. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island, the ranking Democrat on the Senate Judiciary Committee, sent a formal document request to the Department of Justice on August 11, 2025, demanding all records related to Maxwell's transfer. The request was specific and comprehensive. All documents related to the redesignation and transfer of Ghislaine Maxwell from FCI Tallahassee to FPC Bryan. Any documents involving Todd Blanche or any other DOJ official not employed by the Bureau of Prisons. All requests for the transfer and who approved them. All requests for waiver of the sex offender public safety factor, any decision to waive standard procedures for inmate transfer requests, security point scores before and after the transfer, management variables applied to Maxwell's placement, everything. White House's letter was direct. Congress has a strong oversight interest in knowing whether these procedures were followed in transferring Maxwell, and whether that transfer was part of a political deal. A political deal. That is what White House was suggesting. That the 9-hour meeting between Todd Blanche and Ghislaine Maxwell was not an interview. It was a negotiation. Maxwell had information. She had offered to testify before Congress about Epstein if given immunity. She had reportedly been seeking a pardon from Trump, who was once a close friend of Epstein's, and she had leverage, because whatever she knew about Trump's relationship with Epstein, whatever she could say about who else was involved in the trafficking network, it was valuable enough that someone was willing to bend every rule in the Bureau of Prisons handbook to make her comfortable. The timeline supports that theory. The meeting happens. Maxwell spends 9 hours with the Deputy Attorney General. 1 week later, she is transferred to a facility she should never have been eligible for. Within days of arriving at FPC Bryan, Maxwell is sending emails to friends and family describing how much better her situation is. Emails that were later obtained by the House Judiciary Committee and reviewed by NBC News. The institution is run in an orderly fashion which makes for a safer, more comfortable environment for all people concerned. Inmates and guards alike, Maxwell wrote. My situation is improved by being at Bryan. But while Maxwell was settling into her comfortable new accommodations, something else was happening at FPC Bryan. Inmates were being silenced. Multiple women who were housed at the facility reported to congressional investigators that they had been warned not to discuss Ghislaine Maxwell, not in phone calls, not in emails, not in conversations with visitors. At least one inmate who spoke to the Wall Street Journal about Maxwell was transferred out of FPC Bryan immediately after the article was published, moved to a higher security facility as what appeared to be retaliation for talking to the press. Representative Jamie Raskin learned about the gag order and was appalled. He sent a letter to Colette Peters, the director of the Bureau of Prisons, and to the warden at FPC Bryan demanding an explanation. While prison officials may limit inmates' First Amendment rights to preserve security and order, Raskin wrote, you have provided no such justification for why prison security requires a Ghislaine Maxwell gag order. He demanded documentation. He demanded answers. He set a deadline. And he asked the obvious question, if there is nothing unusual about Maxwell's placement, if this is all routine and by the book, why are inmates being threatened with transfer to higher security facilities for mentioning her name? The gag order was not the only suspicious element. Community members in Bryan protested. Raquel Rogers of the Brazos Valley Community Coalition asked why Maxwell received privilege over other inmates. We do not want a child sex trafficker here, she said. The victims' families were even more direct. Virginia Giuffre, one of the most prominent survivors of Epstein's trafficking operation, had died by suicide earlier in 2025, after years of fighting for justice and struggling with the trauma of her abuse. Her family issued a statement after Maxwell's transfer that captured the rage and betrayal survivors were feeling. It is with horror and outrage that we object to the preferential treatment convicted sex trafficker Ghislaine Maxwell has received. Ghislaine Maxwell is a sexual predator who physically assaulted minor children on multiple occasions, and she should never be shown any leniency. Yet, without any notification to the Maxwell victims, the government overnight has moved Maxwell to a minimum security luxury prison in Texas. The statement continued. The Trump administration should not credit a word Maxwell says, as the government itself sought charges against Maxwell for being a serial liar. This move smacks of a cover-up. The victims deserve better. Other survivors joined in. Annie and Maria Farmer, sisters who had both been abused by Epstein and recruited by Maxwell, added their voices. They accused Trump of sending a message that pedophiles deserve preferential treatment and their victims do not matter. They demanded answers. They demanded accountability. And they got neither. The Department of Justice stonewalled. Documents White House requested, never produced. Deadline, ignored. Questions about the PSF waiver, unanswered. BOP issued generic statements but refused to release actual transfer paperwork, security assessments, waiver authorization, nothing. The facts. Todd Blanche spent 9 hours with Maxwell in late July 2025. 7 days later she was transferred to a facility she was categorically ineligible for. The waiver had never been granted to a sex offender in 13 years. Maxwell received special privileges. Inmates were silenced. The Attorney General claimed ignorance, DOJ refused documents, and survivors watched the woman who recruited them for abuse get rewarded with luxury while they were denied justice. 9 hours with Todd Blanche, 7 days to a luxury prison camp. 13 years since any sex offender received a similar waiver. One question nobody in the Trump administration will answer: who ordered Ghislaine Maxwell moved to Club Fed, and what did she promise them in exchange? The cover-up is not a theory anymore. It is documented, it is systematic, and it is still happening.